County Executive Committee to order, please. We will start with item number 2, public comment. Anyone wishing to address the Executive Committee on public comment? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to item number 3, approval of the March 10th, 2022 Executive Committee meeting minutes. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Robinson, second by Supervisor Boots. Any discussion on the motion to approve the March 10th, 2022 Executive Committee meeting minutes? Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. All those in favor of the motion to approve the March 10th, 2022 Executive Committee meeting minutes as printed and presented in your packet signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Say no. Motion carried and is unanimous. Thank you. Unless there's a objection, I would like to take item number 6A out of order because we have with us Diane Steinholz, who is going to give a presentation on the North Central Community Action Program Leadership of Regional Youth Homelessness Demonstration Project Community Coordinated Plan. Is there any objection? No objection. Diane, the floor is yours. And welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate you speak. So I'll just give you a little bit of background and I'll try and be brief because I want to be mindful of all your time as well. So in early 2021, HUD began earmarking dollars for assistance to be directed toward homeless youth. At that time, HUD also began working with nonprofits statewide to start the process of gathering information about young adults and the homelessness situation at hand. Part of this process was to require the nonprofit agencies to write a coordinated community plan so that if money were set aside by HUD and youth housing programs did become available, then the money could be allocated. And this is important because for areas that don't write a coordinated community plan, no funding will ever be available to fund youth homelessness through HUD. So it is imperative that I write, a coordinated community plan, and I've done so, and I've given that to Lance, at least a draft. But I also have to share with you that HUD was unable to find a local nonprofit to write for East Central's coordinated community plan, and CAP Services in Stevens Point declined. So HUD reached out to me and asked if I would write their plan into our plan to keep East Central's options open for the future. So that's why you'll see East Central's plan kind of commingled with North Central Community Actions Plan, North Central's plan, because I wanted to keep that option open for East Central, per HUD. So it doesn't mean I have to serve East Central. If I'm able to do so, I will do that. But it doesn't mean that I have to. I'm just writing an entire plan because I was able to do so. I have their numbers, I have their stats. I'm working with some stakeholders down in that in Wapaka, Waushara, Portage, and Marquette counties. So I have their information available. But anyways, a coordinated community plan serves as the community's blueprint for preventing and ending youth homelessness. So the plan is the result of a comprehensive planning process that brings together diverse stakeholders to develop this plan in response to youth homelessness. So the plan really lays the groundwork for implementation of a community's vision for preventing and ending youth homelessness and reflects authentic youth engagement and voice, establishes a community-wide commitment, and provides a framework for investment in youth-driven projects to respond to the locally defined challenges and needs. So that's really what the CCP or the plan is. And as a community action agency, it's North Central Community Action's responsibility to address the needs identified in the communities we serve, and for me to write for more grant funding if our community can use it. So, we did some homework, and there are quite a bit of youth that are homeless, and they involve the youth aging out of foster care, the youth involved in the justice system, and youth in general have been identified as a growing population that are homeless. And when I say youth, I mean 18 to 24-year-olds. They're considered youth or young adults, and that's what I would write a grant for, to serve that population. Currently, my agency certainly can serve 18 to 24-year-olds with our rapid rehousing and our prevention funding, but they just typically don't show up, at our doors, and they don't show up in shelters. Usually because they don't know how to access us, they don't know that we exist, or they just end up couch surfing or end up in the justice system. And so, this youth housing demonstration project is different in that, as we write this coordinated community plan, we hope to engage a lot of stakeholders, diverse, as I've said in the past here, and those who work with this young population consistently, like social services, social workers, probation and parole, the justice advisory system, runaway shelters, and alternative high schools. And we hope that we, can get a lot of input from these people so that we know how to serve this population. And we also have to set up a youth advisory board, because that board will be the voice of the 18 to 24-year-old homeless population. And that's a requirement from HUD in getting grant funding. The youth advisory board must consist of 18 to 24-year-olds only, and they must have at least 3 formerly homeless individuals or homeless individuals on the board. And so that was my responsibility to get that youth board set up, and we have done so. We have 6 youth that are on our board right now, or their board. No adults older than 24 are allowed to be on the YAB board, but we do have 6, and my agency is helping these 6 youth, young adults, convene and get conversations started, with themselves to see what they need to be successful. That's a HUD requirement. They want us to work with the youth, but they really want solutions to come from the youth, and they want us to guide them. So, we're in the process of doing that. Excuse me. And we're speaking to the youth, and the youth are saying that, what they need from the community to be successful is, they need to know how to maintain employment, maintain relationships, getting and maintaining housing, how to get connected to higher educational training, how to go to counseling, how to get mental health counseling, and things like that. Budgeting. We've heard from a couple of them, they are in their first apartment and they didn't realize how much work it was to take care of a household. And I think we all learn that as we grow, but that's what they're saying. They're just finding a lot of barriers. So, with this coordinated community plan, there's a lot of moving parts, but it's intentional because the goal is to be invited to write a grant for housing programs and housing services that fit the needs identified in our community. So I sent this to Lance and Laura Yari because one of the things that HUD requires is they require a government entity to be a stakeholder in this plan. And being a stakeholder doesn't mean that we're asking for money or a lot of support or anything like that from you. It's just when they see that a county government entity is signed as a stakeholder, they feel like there's more oomph behind the grant, so to speak. There's stakeholders that they really want to see on there, and that's social services departments. They want to see the youth who are on the board as a stakeholder in this plan. And I have all those. I just need Lance's signature, and I've asked him to sign on this coordinated community plan because I think it's important. And if we really find that we want to write the grant and that we would like to have some housing programs and some more services available to the youth, then to be able to do that. So I'm just trying to be proactive in this homeless youth situation. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Diane. I would like to, Lance wants to make a few comments first. And so,
thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Diane. As Diane said, we work very closely with North Central Community Action Program. Each year you do approve through your annual budget the allocation of some funding, to Diane and her agency. You've also approved a strategic plan that, in my estimation, makes very clear that that county staff should be working to support the work of North Central Community Action in developing this plan, and I think certainly I didn't have any issue moving forward with signing the grant as a stakeholder. Again, I referenced the strategic plan. Your first objective within your strategic plan is to ensure that every child makes it to adulthood with health, stability, and growth opportunities. And you call for staff to address trauma, to develop systems to mitigate risks related to juvenile offenders, and Diane made some comments to that, building resilient children, and certainly our social services system, our youth justice system, and our justice alternative system are those stakeholders that Diane is talking about. I just thought it was important to, again, keep the board informed, the executive committee informed of the work that Diane and her agency are doing in submitting this grant. You'll hopefully hear more about it if we do receive the funds that Diane is talking about to be allocated to address this growing problem. But thank you, Diane. I just wanted you to know that I was here, and I did include the plan in the packet. It begins on page 131 of 144. So Diane, if they do have any questions, you can refer to the packet. The draft, the report is marked a draft for the reasons you referenced before. But thank you, Diane.
Thank you.
Any questions? I did have one, Diane. I see we have multiple counties included in the plan: Lincoln, Marathon, Wood, Wapaka, Waushara, Marquette, and Portage. Is it required that each of the county governments sign on as coordinating?
It is not required.
Okay.
And I guess because I have a relationship with Marathon County and it is the largest county in this plan, I just reached out to Lance. I have touched base with all of those other counties though, and some of the social workers there, and they're willing to be stakeholders.
I believe, as is Marathon County. I just was curious as to whether there might be a requirement to have the other counties. Supervisor Robinson. We're trying to get a mic turned on, Diane. I apologize.
You know, a couple of years ago, we were approached by CATS relative to trying to deal with the issue of homelessness for teenagers. Are there any relationships between this proposal and that proposal? And, you know, I know that they're focusing more on the teenage population or younger, but are there opportunities for us to coordinate these activities?
Diane, I don't know if you've met with them or not.
I did hear. I actually, yes, and so I really wanted Kathleen to actually head this up, but she said she just wasn't able to do so. So I took this project on because it really does fit, you know, the young adult, which she does not serve, but she has signed on as a runaway shelter to be a referral to this grant if we get it. So we would be working with her and in her organization, CATS.
And Diane, this is Lance, just a clarification, and you may know more than I. My understanding with respect to the Keeping Area Teens Safe group is that they work, at this point, their population that they're serving is a voluntary population. That is the youth and the parents. There needs to be a voluntary placement for the child to remain there. Is that your understanding
Yes.
as well? Okay.
Yes. And I will say that we have helped two young adults that have come from that teen home because they were only allowed to stay there a week. They were 17, and then I guess I don't know all the details, but they weren't able to stay at that teen home anymore. So we helped these two individuals get into housing. We were able to find a landlord to help to house them, and we help them with rent, you know, with our private programming.
Great. Any other questions for Diane? Supervisor McCune? No, okay, all right. I think all the questions have been answered, Diane, and, obviously, I think consensus is that Marathon County is definitely supportive of being the entity of jurisdiction, so thank you so very
Okay.
much.
Thank you. Have a good Easter, everyone.
You too. Okay, moving back to item number 5, operational function required by statute, ordinance, or resolution. Item number A, identification of a county board supervisor for participation in the Uniquely Wisconsin program. I will throw this to Administrator Leonard.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. As you likely recall, the county board did approve the allocation of funding toward Marathon County's participation in the Uniquely Wisconsin program. That's the partnership between the Wisconsin Counties Association and Discover Wisconsin. That project is underway. We've identified Sarah Dowda from administration, as well as Tim White from the CVB, the Convention Visitors Bureau, to be two of the point people for Marathon County from that project. That said, the work is about to get underway, and some of that work is going to be working within the framework that Discover Wisconsin provides for kind of the areas of emphasis, whether those, and this is just off the top of my head, whether it's restaurants or local events or attractions. We're going to need to work within that framework and identify those entities or events that we would like to work with Discover Wisconsin to highlight. My thought process is that is a good avenue for involvement from the county board. And I was requesting that this body identify a county board supervisor for participation in that program. I know you do have a new board is about to be seated, and new committee appointments ultimately will follow from that. But that program is about to be underway, and I think certainly administration can support that. But selfishly, I don't want to be the one necessarily to lead up that entire decision-making process within administration. I think there's some aspects of that county board supervisor involvement would not only be welcome, but it would actually improve the end product for Marathon County.
So throw it out for discussion. Thoughts, suggestions, volunteers? Supervisor Guild.
This is Supervisor Mask.
You'll be next, Supervisor Mask. Supervisor Guild first.
Thank you. I guess so. First question is, has any county board supervisors expressed interest to leadership that you're aware of in the months that we've been discussing this?
I don't recall anyone reaching out to me. That said, that's not surprising because I don't think people knew it was an option.
Right.
I know we talked about this program first at Extension Education Economic Development. It ultimately, as I referenced before, did move forward to the full board for consideration and was approved for funding. But no one has reached out to me expressing interest in serving in a capacity, quite frankly, that they probably didn't know existed.
Well,
And the same is true for me. I mean, I don't believe that anybody knew that there was a need, that there was, or we were looking for an individual to fill that capacity. So nobody has reached out to me at this point.
Okay, so then I guess my follow-up comment is it possible to defer this decision until after the new committees are identified, and maybe try and see if there's someone on the Extension Education Economic Development Committee that would be a good fit to kind of keep it in alignment with that? Or do we really need to get something identified like now? I know there was a timeline in there, but I wasn't sure about the flexibility there.
I defer to Sarah. She's been more involved, but I think if it happened promptly after the reseating of that committee or the population of that committee, we should be fine.
We can certainly wait until the seating of the committees. As Lance mentioned, the project is underway and is continuing based on a timeline involving the other counties that are involved as well. But we would just prefer to have someone involved as soon as possible, as we have continued to meet as a group with Discover Wisconsin to begin brainstorming ideas, putting together concepts. So the sooner we can have someone involved is certainly helpful, but we can wait until those committees are seated.
Might I suggest that we have a brief description of this to the board on next Tuesday's meeting, and then also put that in the packet for any interest on any board member that may be there. They can put that on their preference option. Supervisor Mask is next.
My questions were answered. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Yeah, I'll make an agenda item for a brief overview of this program for Tuesday's meeting as an agenda item, and then Sarah, if we could include that on the information request from the supervisors as far as the prioritization as another option. Okay. Moving on to item number B, identification of the County Board Supervisor for participation in the Child Care Dream Up Grant. Administrator Leonard, please.
Thank you, and I'll be brief before I turn it over to Nor from my office to answer any questions and provide a bit more information. But this is that program that, again, was discussed initially at the Extension Education Economic Development Committee, addressing the shortage of quality, affordable childcare in our community, was identified by that committee as a topic they wanted to address as the term was coming to a close. The grant application that Nora is going to talk about was identified as one of those next steps, and it was incorporated into the administration work plan that was approved ultimately by the board. So Nora's here to tell you a little bit about the Dream Up grant that we did recently submit to the state, and Marathon County did essentially lead that grant application with a number of other stakeholders. But again, we're looking for, if there is a county board supervisor, I think again, elected official involvement throughout this process, if we are selected for the grant, would be valuable, because at some point, should we be selected for the grant at the end of that process, there may be a requirement for the allocation of funds, and someone being involved in that plan development, again, strikes me as a good process. But with that, Nora, you want to talk a little bit about the Child Care Dream Up grant?
Work?
There you go.
So the Dream Up Grant is ran by the First Children's Finance. It's a nonprofit organization, and that organization is focused on increasing the supply and business sustainability of childcare. And this is also supported by the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families. The thing about the Dream Up Grant, it provides a really unique opportunity to bring together a diverse team to address the challenges that is facing the childcare industry. So our core team, you can see in more detail in our application in the packet, is composed of a cross-sector of community leaders, including representatives from the City of Wausau, the Greater Wausau Chamber of Commerce, North Central Technical College, United Way of Marathon County, Child Caring, and we also managed to get a childcare provider, Wausau Child Care, on the team. Just to name a few, I believe we have 15 core team members, so from diverse backgrounds and expertise, so that's great. We submitted the application on April 4th, and that was the deadline. County Administrator Lance is currently the team lead. However, I'm not sure if that would change in any way. We'll be notified on April 25th, so I believe that's sometime next week, on the status of our application. if we are chosen as one of the communities in this round, the process will include 4 facilitated consultations ran by First Children's Finance to create a strategic supply building plan. So we're not going into this grant process or the application with a specific project in mind. It's kind of gathering all the experts from different, sides of the issue and try to come up with a plan. And then there's also 10 webinars included. Everyone in the core team is committed to attending those webinars. We would be eligible for $75,000 in grant to carry out our strategic plan. However, the only condition is funding cannot be used for capital improvement.
Thanks, Nor. So just to summarize, when I look at the grant, my assessment, essentially it's technical assistance. They're going to provide us technical assistance to develop a plan. And then if we move forward with the plan, $75,000 to start to carry it out. But I think all of us on the stakeholder group, when we have met, I think there's an inherent recognition that this answer is going to take more than $75,000 to sustain. And it's going to require as Nor said, a pretty diverse group of stakeholders from various sectors, education, business, higher education. We also have DC Everest and the Wausau School Board, or Wausau School District, representation. But it's going to require a lot of people with a lot of different skill sets to develop that plan. So hopefully we receive positive news on the 25th, later this month. But ultimately, again, my thought process for involving someone from the board, if this committee so chooses, is that being involved in that plan building exercise, I think would be a positive experience should the board need to ultimately allocate funding through its annual budget or outside of it, should there be a role for the county that, again, is in some form financial in nature.
Questions, thoughts by the committee? Again, I think this is another opportunity to have a brief presentation to the board, just a brief presentation to the board, and see if there is a board member that's willing to participate from the ground floor to be able to lead the project. That would be my take on it. So unless there's any other idea, I will also amend the agenda to include a brief presentation. Nor, if you could be at the organizational meeting, that would be great to be able to give the little background that we do have here to the new board members so that they can also put down their interest on their selection. Any other discussion? Okay, we will move on then to review and recommend approval of the rules review revisions to Chapter 2, Section 2.01, County Board Rules of Procedure. And we have the chair of the Rules Review Task Force, and he will give us an overview of those rules.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And good afternoon to the Executive Committee. A nice day out there, snowing again, but shortly I'm just going to give a quick overview of the Rules Review Committee, who had completed the task of reviewing all 63 pages of the 2.01, which is the County Board Rules and Procedures. We worked on the rules review for 7 months. So it was a complete overview of the entire policy. But before I move forward with that, and I hope everybody has a copy of the rules in your packet, there are a couple changes that I'll discuss right away. However, before I go further, I'd just like to thank the rest of the Rules Review Committee, which consisted of Supervisor Seiler, Supervisor Seefeld, Supervisor Langahan, Supervisor Robinson, Supervisor Jacobson, and Supervisor Schley. who sadly passed away and was not able to complete the task with us, but he was greatly missed. Starting looking at the first page, which is on page 60 of your packet, is where the beginning of the governing body, Chapter 2, begins. And what's in your packet, starting with page 1, there were some verbiage changes. It was reworded, so what you have in your packet on page 1 has been changed, and Administrator Leonard, along with Corp Counsel Mike Puner, went through these and made changes after the committee had approved the changes that are actually in the board packet. So, Administrator Leonard, if you want to cover that.
Sure, I can. And if you look on page 60, that is as Rules Review Committee Chair McEwen referenced, that's where the packet that was ultimately approved by the Rules Review Committee begins. So that is as approved by Rules Review. There are 3 areas that, after that, we got some feedback on a couple of pieces that are also included within the packet today, and those begin, and they are bookmarked in the documents, but if they begin on page 126 with 3 specific proposed, for your consideration, potential modifications. And you'll see that the language from, if you look on page 126, the proposed rule as drafted by Corporation Counsel Puner moved away in section 2.01, sub 1, sub F. It moved away from using the terms organizational, adjourned organizational, annual, and adjourned annual meetings to utilize the terms educational meetings and monthly business meetings. And the reason was that in the previous draft that was approved by Rules Review, essentially it was internally inconsistent. We talked about permitting virtual attendance at the business meetings, and it indicated, it read it specifically, supervisors must attend any adjourned organizational, and adjourned annual business meetings in person. Well, based on the nomenclature that this body has used for its meetings, that was internally inconsistent because we referred to the Thursday meetings, which I'll call the educational meetings, sometimes as adjourned organizational meetings. And likewise, the Thursday meetings were sometimes adjourned business meetings. It was inconsistent. So Corporation Counsel drafted this alternative language to make more clear that at the educational meeting, supervisors are permitted to attend any monthly educational meeting of the County Board of Supervisors or any meeting of a subordinate body of the board in person or by approved audiovisual means. Only members physically present for a meeting may attend a closed session discussion. Likewise, then moving down to sub 2, it references monthly business meetings. Supervisors must attend any monthly business meeting of the Marathon County Board of Supervisors in person. It still provides, as was approved by the Rules Review Committee, the ability of the board chair to permit attendance by approved audiovisual means under limited circumstances. But that's the first area that Corporation Counsel made a suggested modification after Rules has met. So this, again, we included the document as approved by Rules Review because that was the work of the committee. The second area that Corporation Counsel suggested begins on page 128, and that relates to really a matter of housekeeping. It was brought up that the county board did make modifications to the salaries for this upcoming term of the Board of Supervisors. So Corporation Counsel Puner did take a look at Rule 19 and make suggested modifications to that rule in light of the board's action in Resolution 80-21, which I believe was approved in November. That did make those changes to the compensation structure of the board. So you'll see that again on page 128. The last area of proposed proposed for your consideration, I should say, modifications relates to the timing, specifically the dates of the meetings. And I will go to that section. That is Rule 15. Specifically, the Rules Review Committee clarified and took action to approve specific dates and times for all of the standing committees. And it was discussed by staff from Conservation, Planning, and Zoning. Essentially, they're moving, under the proposed schedule, they were moving from the first week of the month on Tuesday to the second week of the month on Tuesday. And there was a request by staff, and I understand it, they did speak with Chair of the Environmental Resources Committee, Chair Longenhan, about essentially remaining on that first Tuesday. A couple of the reasons that they thought that was advantageous, it would allow for additional time to make sure that any rezone resolutions that were acted upon by the committee were updated and to the clerk's office in time to be included in the packet before the formal board meeting. It also would allow the committee to continue with the calendar that was sent out to the local towns. The ERC committee does engage very frequently with towns, and they send out a yearly calendar of their meetings to those towns. So the request was to essentially flip, you'll see what's up on the screen, Rule 15A1, Sub I, I should say, reflects the Public Safety Committee meeting at 1:30 p.m. on Tuesday, again, of that week of the first Thursday of each month. Flip that with the Environmental Resources Committee under Section 2. The question, should you choose to do that, really, I think you'd have one other question to answer, and that is the time of the public safety meeting. You have 6 of your 7 committees, if you would have public safety meet at 3 o'clock, would meet at 3. If you keep public safety at 1:30, 5 of 7. But those are the 3 areas that, between Corporation Counsel and contact that I had with staff from CPZ, that we just wanted to make sure you had the opportunity to discuss. Of course, you do have the opportunity to make any changes to all of the rules that were brought to you by Rules Review.
Supervisor Robinson.
Relative to that section, I thought we had a discussion, I thought we had agreed relative to the HR Finance Committee that the second meeting would be on that 4th Tuesday, which is different than the language that's in the rule, because there's times where the county board meeting is on that second Tuesday of the month. And I know we had the discussion because of the meeting, there's the business meeting, the first meeting of the month, and the educational meeting, the second meeting, but this doesn't reflect that time certain for that date. It ties it into the county board meeting, the same day as the county board meeting. And that's fine, except for those months where the county board moves its date.
I can certainly make that change if that's the desire of the body.
I thought that was our discussion.
You're correct. I did not catch it. Yeah, but we did specifically discuss that second meeting. So I would agree that that's what the committee had agreed on. So it should be put that way.
So just to clarify, as I understand it, and we'll look back and make sure we get that corrected, but it's the 4th Tuesday?
Second and the 4th Tuesday then.
Well, the second Wednesday. Under this rule.
So what is your pleasure on the proposed changes that were just discussed by Administrator Leonard. Again, one, the inconsistency of the use of the terms adjourned organizational meeting and that, and then also the others. What's your pleasure?
Do you want to wait till we're done with all these to go through this, or do you want to talk about them right now? Talk about them right now? Okay. I guess the one thing I had a question on is, we set these forward, which is fine and dandy, until we start determining committees, and then I guess, because I'll say it right now, like when public safety first started, the reason we had ours at 2:00 is because Health and Human Services was after us. But then for me personally, I had issues because of kids and things like that. What happens when you have these committee meetings and we have them set, these are gonna be set in stone because it's now part of the board rules. Can we adjust them, or let's say the new board chairs, standing committee chairs, can they change that time, or are we kind of stuck on that time if we approve this?
Thank you, Supervisor Boots. The reason that we discussed the times and the dates is we're trying to coordinate with the clerk's office, with staff, because they would be doing all the agendas and the attending the meetings. Plus, we wanted to eliminate the overtime from security. So if the meetings would start after 3:00, it might be difficult to eliminate that overtime. So that was what discussed, and I know Supervisor Robinson had brought up those also as far as the staff. So could it be adjusted? Like I said, we left infrastructure at 9:00 because they've always met at 9:00. It wasn't discussed about changing public safety until after we were looking at consistency. But if it's not agreeable, we could leave public safety at 1:30. It's definitely going to eliminate the overtime. There's never been an issue with that.
Well, the only issue I see with that is, right now I'm the chair of public safety, but that doesn't mean I'll be the chair of public safety in 2 weeks. So that's where it gets, I guess, when you start dealing with 38 members on the standing committees. Oh, I get what we're doing. I understand it totally. I'm just saying, after the fact, what's it going to be like? I mean, can we work with staff? But if this is now our rules that we're adopting, we have to have a 2/3 supermajority to change that. Are we going to really bring this back to the full board to say, can I change the time I'm doing my meeting?
Administrator Leonard?
From an operational perspective, I was just going to answer your specific question, but that's how your rules would need to be amended, because they do provide specific dates and times. The one other piece, and I can't speak for the committee's desire, but I recall the discussion. The thought process was, that was expressed, was these times and dates would then be provided following the organizational meeting where all of the board members sign up for committees, so that they would know, hey, if I know I have an obligation on a Tuesday in the afternoon, I'm not going to sign up for a meeting of a committee that meets on Tuesday in the afternoon. But to your specific question about could you modify times, if you're going to change your standing meeting time, my sense is you need to modify your rules.
And to that point, I mean, if the full committee and staff are in support of changing that time to a start time instead of 3:00, and it's consistent with the full committee and consistent with staff and agreeable to staff, I don't see why the board would not support that change.
Thank you. And like I said, as far as the public safety is we did agree on the 1:30. I guess, is there a willingness to change it to 3 for consistency, or leave it as the board left it with when we had our last meeting?
I think it's a little bit hard to tell because we don't know the makeup of each of those committees and what the availability of each of the individuals are. I think you have to go with what you proposed. If we want to move it to 3, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But I think what we want is something that we can present to the 38 members so that when they make their selection, they know tentatively at least what time the meeting is normally going to be scheduled. Kim, you wanted something you wanted to add? Oh, okay, excuse me. Supervisor Robinson.
Mr. Chair, in lieu of your desire to deal with the administrator's proposed changes, I would move that we adopt and forward to the county board the Rules Committee recommendations that would allow us to amend it and deal with it as we go through. So I will make that motion.
So your motion is to include the amendments?
It's moved to approve that report. I can do that, or I was then going to offer an amendment to incorporate those changes.
Okay. So your motion is to move forward the recommendations from the Rules Review Committee to the full board. Is there a second to that motion? Second by Supervisor Boots. Now Supervisor Robinson.
Then I would move to amend the recommendations to reflect the changes that the administrator outlined relative to the naming of the meetings and the other changes relative to the flipping of the ARC and public safety and the language on the HR Finance second committee meeting.
Okay, is there a second to the amendment?
Mask, second.
Supervisor Mass with a second. So is there any discussion on the amendment, which is to incorporate the changes that were discussed by Administrator Leonard, one in the naming and being consistent in our rules to allow virtual participation on what was normally called the educational meeting, and then also changing the and flipping the public safety and ERC committee. And
I
HR
Supervisor
Finance.
Mask, I have a-
And
Sorry.
go ahead, Supervisor Mask.
Okay, so I have a question, or maybe just a little clarification. Originally, public safety was held at noon, and it was to be for the convenience of the DA's office and judges and anybody who was taking their lunch time to come to our meetings. Would it, and I don't know how it is right now with people who have to attend from, staff from the DA's office, et cetera. Would changing public safety to 3 o'clock cause a hardship for those departments? So that's something to consider. And I don't know if it is anymore, but I know originally it was at noon forever.
Commissioner McEwen?
Yeah, thank you. I do recall it being at noon, and for that very reason. However, I know we have the present chair of public safety. I don't know if there's any concerns voiced to him from the district attorney's office or sheriff's department or the other staff that shows up. But are we, with this proposal that Supervisor Rosman, are we leaving the 1:30 for public safety, or are we changing it to 3, I guess?
His amendment was to leave it, was not to amend the 1:30, and so it's leaving public safety at 1:30.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Guild?
So to be clear, the amendment, are you referencing the document on page 126 in red? So then I have a question on that document that hasn't, I don't think's been touched on yet. Under 1D, am I reading correctly that this would move the educational meeting to the 3rd Tuesday of every month and the business meeting to the 4th Tuesday of every month? Is that an intended change? Because I did not see that on the first page of the document from Rules Review, or am I misinterpreting this? I do not have my computer, so I'm using what is accessible through the public site. So this is I'm referencing the one that's on the county board website right now.
That's on page 12 of the rules. Page 71 of the packet.
120. I believe it's 126. And I believe,
126.
I'm looking at page 126.
and I believe, I'll have to Certainly, I can't speak for Corporation Counsel, but I infer that that is simply a Scrivener's error, that he meant to type Thursday in subsection DI for the educational meeting and typed Tuesday because there was no discussion about moving your meeting date. So I
Right.
will make that.
Okay, because I thought that was kind of a big change to not discuss.
It was never the intent.
Okay, so item 1DI should be the third Thursday of each
Correct.
month for educational still.
Correct.
Do I have to make some kind of an amendment to an amendment to fix that? John, I feel like I just stressed you out.
It,
Okay. That can be considered a housekeeping item?
Yeah.
So for the purposes of the
Yep.
saying it out loud, we're all in
It-
agreement.
It's
That's a Thursday.
consistent. I mean, there was never any discussion to move it to the informational and educational meeting to Tuesday. And so that was just, again, a Scrivener's error. And so I don't believe that there would necessarily need action to change that.
Okay.
Supervisor Boots?
Quick question on page 127 of ours, I guess. So what we're saying in that, if I'm reading this correctly, is for our standing committees, we still can do virtual, is what it's basically saying. Now, I know we had talked in the past, at some point, are we gonna do away with that? Because I know that we had discussed where we're losing the continuity in the board sometimes, where there's not the in-person type thing. So I guess I'm just wondering where we're going with that at some point. Are we kind of gonna try to keep this, or is this just something temporary? I guess I would like to hear what the board had to say about it, as I wasn't there, so.
Thank you, Supervisor Boots. We did discuss that at Rules about the advantages to keeping every meeting except the voting meeting on Tuesday as options as having to be WebEx with, I believe it's proper audio and video accessibility to the meeting. And I know Supervisor Robinson was in favor of that, and like I said, it was for it was more convenient for the younger supervisors that presently have jobs, and so we decided to make it permanent, not temporary. Is that correct, Supervisor Robinson? Yeah. Okay.
that's,
So-
I'm sorry, it's up on your screen to give you the page number for those of you who are appearing virtually. It's on page 72 of the packet. That discussion that Board Vice Chair McEwen and Committee Chair McEwen was referencing, it talks about this is where the Rules Review Committee, the language they came up with relative to allowing standing committees to conduct meetings by approved audiovisual means, with an exception, however, for closed session.
So, I was in on those discussions, and I understand Supervisor Boots is concerned. I think there is definitely a advantage to having in-person meetings. There's discussion. There's people get to know each other. That was discussed, but there also was a recognition of the fact that if people, for convenience purposes, are able to still attend and virtually, and as long as they had proper video and audio, that it would still accommodate a quorum of the meeting and not run into a quorum problem. Supervisor Robinson.
We should have caught this at the rules review, but we have in November, we have a different schedule because of statutory requirements relative to the budget. Do we want to put a note in there delineating those dates? And in December, we only have historically one meeting. We've not had the educational meeting. Can we, if we address those through a note, or do we need to have the rule reflect the November timeline for the budget and the December having one meeting?
Well, I think you could do it two ways. One, I think the chair, the way the rules are written, the chair still has that flexibility in calling meetings. And because state statute requires the public hearing for the budget to be on a certain date, I don't know that we can, but we could also put a note in that says that those meetings are typically different than our normal schedule.
If I may, Mr. Chair,
Go
you
ahead.
do have the annual meeting date is expressly referenced in your rules. And if you look to page 126, it does call under subsection B, annual meeting of the county board shall be held on the Tuesday following the second Monday in November. The board chair does have the ability to cancel meetings, so with respect to your one meeting being held the month of December, and the board chair does have the ability to schedule under subsection E, the authority to schedule additional meetings for the purpose of discussion and determination of selected agenda items. So there's some level of flexibility. However, certainly if you want us to include some note language, we can develop that.
Thank you. I just guess I'd like to ask Corp Counsel what he feels.
Use a mic. Dan, you gotta use a mic.
If you guys want to have a note, that certainly can be done. I don't think that it's necessary. I think that the way it's currently written, it accomplishes our purpose, but we can certainly add more.
Supervisor Robinson says
Thank
he's
you.
fine with the way it is and not having an additional complexity. Supervisor Leahy.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Got a little angry there with the mic. Maybe some clarification about the allowance for the audio-visual. The language when it's talking about that accessibility mentions that it's on the responsibility of the supervisor to let the clerk know that they're going to be attending via phone or WebEx, correct? And if that is the case, then it needs to be properly posted under open meeting laws. But my question is, it's very easy to forget to email the clerk, to call the clerk. Your schedule might change, that day, and you're going to want to attend virtually instead of going in person. Was there any discussion about how that affects how we're posting things? Or are we just automatically going to assume that someone's attending virtually and that's how it will be posted?
This is Administrator Leonard. I think as a practical matter, that's what we'll do.
That would have been my preference, is that each of the standing committees will always be posted with the ability for a WebEx attendance. I think that would be consistent with the rule that we have.
And then just to clarify, legally, there can be exceptions made for a certain supervisor to appear remotely. The public does not have to have that identical access. All they have to be provided is with an effective way to monitor a meeting. So if most of the body is meeting in person and only like one or two of the supervisors will appear remotely, there doesn't have to be a public WebEx that's made available. There can be, but we're not legally required to do so.
Okay. Okay,
Thank
we
you.
have before us, we still have an amendment and a second to incorporate the changes that were suggested. Any further discussion on the amendment? Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Say no. Motion is carried. Any further discussion on the rules now as amended? Supervisor Dickinson.
Hey, it's working. All right.
You didn't even have to shake it?
I didn't
What?
have to shake it, no. On the page, it's 15 in the packet itself, I believe here, regarding vice chairs of standing committees. It seems now that vice chairpersons of standing committees are required to attend the executive committee meeting. Did I read that correctly? Additional duties? So it's page 74 of the packet, page 15 of the rules, and it says, letter D, 18D, additional duties and responsibilities of standing committee vice chairpersons. And number 1 says, attend and participate in meetings of the Marathon County Executive Committee as a non-voting member. So although they're not actually going to be voting, we're requiring them to attend a meeting. So potentially at that moment, you're going to have 16 members of the board meeting as an executive committee. What was the reasoning behind requiring vice chairs of standing committees to be at the executive meeting?
Vice Chair McCune?
Thank you. Well, the purpose was to get the vice chairs more involved with the executive committee, and there was an additional pay that was offered to the, or is going to be offered to the vice chairs of the committees, but it was the feeling of the commission, the Rules Review Committee, that the importance of getting the vice chairs involved with the executive committee. I don't know if there was any other particular reason, unless Administrator Leonard or Supervisor Robinson has any reasons, but we would, we might have been able to say encourage them to participate, but it does say attend, so.
If I may, just
Administrator
my
Leonard.
recollection, consistent with your reference to the increase in pay, under subsection D, it talks about additional duties and responsibilities of the standing committee vice chairpersons. In addition to section C above, standing committee chairpersons shall attend the executive committee as a non-voting member, but sub 2 is in the event the standing committee chairperson is absent, unavailable, or incapacitated, or the standing committee chair position is vacant, the vice chairperson shall act in the place of the standing committee chairperson as a voting member of the executive committee. So the additional pay was provided through that resolution that I referenced before, but I believe that was discussed at least at Rules Review, but I can't speak for what the rationale was for attending necessarily when they're not required to vote. But there is the provision in that rule that in the event the standing committee chairperson is unable to be at that meeting, that vice chairperson does have the ability to act in their stead, essentially.
Supervisor Robinson?
You know, I think clearly that's something we can debate, but I think the intent, part of the intent behind that is that I think 2 years ago we tried to elevate the role of the vice chairs and provide a mentoring opportunity in the development of some of our, if you will, bench strength relative to the governance of the county board. And I know with Supervisor Leahy, we have discussions before each and every one of our committee meetings to go over the agenda to try to, you know, in the event, and there was at least one time where I couldn't at the last minute show up, and so that they were there. So I think it's just an effort to try to develop that bench strength and understanding of the county board and have more participation. If it's mandatory or permissive, I don't know that it's a big deal, but I think we wanted to also have an opportunity, if the executive committee is reflecting the committees, you know, each committee is represented on there, it's important to have a voice for that committee, because there are things that both go to the executive committee and come from the executive committee back to the committee. So I think it's a good idea, but it was, again, trying to develop that bench strength.
Supervisor Mass?
Dickinson. Just Supervisor Dickinson, and then I'll get Supervisor Mass next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the concern I would have with that, one would be, do you fall into a quorum issue with another smaller committee, an airport board or something like that? You're going to be more likely to do that. That's a bad example because we have the other county associated with it. But I think there's a concern there. I think you also get into the concern, what you were just talking about before with public safety, that now you're going to get a requirement of 16 persons to be in the room, and you're going to make it, again, increasingly more difficult for people who are working full-time or have other arrangements to then be at another meeting. I think the idea of education is fantastic, you know, and want to have mentorship and things like that, but putting in a requirement upon that it just seems it's going to be much more difficult on people to do that. Additionally, I just had another thought on that, the idea that the chair, vice chair of that committee would then vote for that other person who's a standing member on that committee. I would have some concern with that as well. We don't do that in any of our other committees. We do kind of a shifting to say, well, who is going to be the voting members of those committees? You know, again, I think I understand the intent there that someone's not going to be there and you want to have the 10 votes, but it's not necessary as long as you have the quorum. So, thank you.
Supervisor Boots?
Yeah, and
Excuse me, I had Supervisor Mask.
Oh, sorry
I'm
about
sorry, Supervisor Mask is next.
Thank you. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this was in play the last 2 years, if not longer. This is not new. Am I correct or am I wrong?
Well, it wasn't mandatory before, Supervisor Mask, but I think we made it mandatory as one of the conditions of providing the additional compensation, is my recollection. But I don't think we had it mandatory that they were attending, and we didn't have it that they would step in the capacity to vote if the chair was not present. The way I read this, that if the chair is not present for that standing committee and the vice chair is, the vice chair can vote in that absence. I think under incapacitation is a different set of standards, but under this it just says absence. So I think they could, the way I read it, the vice chair could vote in the absence of the chair.
As I recall, that did take place last year when there was a chair that was not there and the vice chair was. So I know it wasn't new. Thank you.
yeah, there's certain things in the document that, I mean, I'm sure are going to be addressed at the full board as far as minutes, but I think in respect to the committee that put the work in, we would forward this on as is, and then we'll, because I do have some issues with D also and some other things in here, but for the most part, I think that was a lot of work done, and I think they did a good job of addressing some of the major concerns we had from the last session. So with that, I guess those were my comments.
Other discussion? Supervisor Dickinson.
So I just had one question regarding the responsibilities of the standing committees. And I know there's this conversation with diversity affairs being removed and then moving those tasks underneath the committees as a statement. Each one of those committees has a statement, a specific duty and responsibility for that, for diversity and inclusion. And my question is why is that an individual responsibility when we have a responsibility section for each committee further down that lists, you know, in some cases 20 or I think for infrastructure? Why would that not just be a duty and responsibility underneath that? I'm just wondering why that came up.
Supervisor Robinson?
You know, that's a good suggestion, and I'm not averse to it, but what we wanted to do was to make sure the criticism the last session was that we had the Diversity Affairs Commission, unelected officials making recommendations relative to policy for that. We wanted to make sure that we captured those critical issues in looking at our comprehensive plan and put it in there. I don't think that's a bad suggestion to put it under the responsibilities. We just wanted to make sure that it was captured.
Other discussion? Vice Chair McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with Supervisor Robinson and Supervisor Dickinson. As long as it's listed in, each one of the standing committees, that was the purpose of putting it in there. So I think I would not have a issue with putting that in the rules with each one of the, the standing committees. So it would be fine with me.
Is that a motion to move that role to the section where each of the standing committees' roles and responsibilities are?
That would be my motion.
Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Boots. Any discussion? Supervisor Leahy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I wouldn't have an objection to that as long as the aforementioned specific language remains. It does look like each standing committee addresses diversity and inclusion in a way that is applicable to the work that they're doing. So as long as it doesn't become just a generic, hey, let's care about diversity, line 9, I think that language does need to stay to show that each committee has a different role in, exploring and researching and working through those issues. Thank you.
Okay, any other discussion? Vice Chair McEwen.
I just want to clarify that with Supervisor Dickinson. The intent was to leave the language just to move it where the place is.
I have other thoughts about the language, but I don't think now is the time to bring that up.
Good, thank you.
So the motion is to just move the current language as it relates to diversity and inclusion to the roles and responsibilities of each of the standing committees. Am I understanding the motion and the second correct?
Yes.
Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Any other discussion? Any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, the motion is to approve the rules of the body of work from the Rules Review Committee as amended by this committee to move forward to the full board for its consideration at the organizational meeting on April 19th. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
And motion carries and is unanimous. Thank you, and we'll back to the agenda.
I was just going to
Supervisor?
thank the executive committee for considering that. And like I said, it was a lot more extensive than I thought it was going to be, but it was 7 months and it was very, very thorough. And also want to thank the staff that assisted us with all the changes. Thank you.
Okay, we are now down to item D, review and update county board chairperson guidelines and expectations as referenced in the county board rules. It was brought to our attention that there was and is a list of guidelines and expectations of the board chairperson, and the chairperson and this committee is responsible to keeping that up to date and making additions and or subtractions. There was a couple of additions that was when the county board approved the CJCC, the Criminal Justice Coordinate Council, the bylaws of the CJCC has the chairperson of the board be the vice chair or the chair of the CJCC. And so we wanted to include that on the role and responsibilities of the chairperson. Also, per rules, the chairperson of the board is responsible for reviewing and approving the mileage reimbursement and or meal reimbursement or reimbursements in general for not only the county board membership, but also for any committee with citizen involvement for their reimbursement requests. So those are done on a quarterly basis, so that was also included on the list as an adjustment. And then one last thing was the annual recognition and retirement banquet for the county employees and supervisors. There may not, or there will be an annual event, or might be an annual event, but it may, so I would ask Administrator Leonard to provide some, a little bit of background on it. Historically, prior to the pandemic, we had a banquet recognizing employees that retired, also recognizing employees for their number of years of service, and also recognizing supervisors when they retired. And so the county board chairperson was expected to attend that because there was recognition to supervisors that were potentially retiring. But there may be some change since the pandemic. That annual banquet has not taken place, and there may be some additional new annual recognition retirement, something other than a banquet. So I'll defer to Administrator.
I'll be very brief. My only suggestion on number 5 was to change the word banquet to event. It's the lawyer in me, words matter, and I just thought event would be nicer.
So those are the suggested changes that is consistent with what the current board is doing, our current board chair is doing. Supervisor Robinson.
I would just request that we spell out the acronyms in here. I don't think many people know what the North Central Wisconsin NCWDB, I think that's the Workforce Development Board.
It is.
But if we could just spell out all the terms that are in here, people will have a better understanding of what we're talking about and what we're expecting you to do.
As in yesterday's presentation too, we use acronyms all too often and so I have no problem spelling out all of those acronyms. Any other discussion? Supervisor Dickinson.
So my question is, why does this document exist as opposed to, and when we have stuff in the rules, why do we have 2 places to go?
Great question. It goes back to the previous Corp Council. The previous Corp Council said, and I think it rightfully so, it was discussed when the chair's salary was increased significantly. It goes back 4 years ago. The chair's salary went from roughly $15,000 to $30,000. And in doing so, the board felt that there ought to be expectations that the chair is going to be responsible for in order to receive that increased salary. And they also recognized that this list may change from time to time, that wouldn't be necessarily part of the rule that is adopted by the rules. And so it was recommended by Corp Council then to provide a list of those responsibilities, and it would be reviewed by the executive committee and potentially added to or subtracted to by the executive committee.
So to follow up, when was the last time the executive committee reviewed the document? Is it today?
It is today.
And so in the rules, there actually talks about this document, but there isn't, it says from time to time that it would be updated. I would offer on Tuesday that we make some changes to actually reviewing this document
Either
more
annually
regularly.
or semi-annually. I would agree.
If I could,
Supervisor Mask?
Supervisor Mask, go
Oops,
ahead.
sorry. Oh, and I don't know if this is relevant, but since we could have a new county board chair coming up this next term, and if this person doesn't meet these requirements, are we bound by that $30,000 a year, or can we go back and look at reducing the salary if the person isn't doing their job, or do we just look at replacing that person?
I will refer that to Corp Counsel. I don't believe there's any mechanism, as I understand the statute, to reducing the salary once the salary is set for the term of that, in this case, the chairperson. So I don't believe Supervisor Masters any ability to reduce that salary. There is the ability for the board to take action to remove a sitting chair with a simple majority. But that has always been the case.
Thank you.
But I also would refer to Corp Counsel.
As far as deference to me, like, I agree that the board, that's one of the remedies, is removal for underperformance, but we certainly can do some research to see whether there is a possibility to revisit and revise a member's salary and make that consistent with whatever the board deems their performance to be.
And I will just, and I'm not trying to be argumentative, Dan, I think when the last time that this was taken up, there was that the salary of the chairperson by the state statute had to be set prior to November 1st of the period when people could take out nomination papers. In fact, the only reason I know that is because it was discussed 2 years prior to the actual impact of doing the increase. And so there was one term where they thought they could do the increase at a later point, but it was deemed by the Corp Counsel at that point that since the discussion was taking place after November 1st, and papers, nomination papers could be taken out by supervisors, there was no way of changing the chair's salary specifically. Vice chair salary was different, as was the amount for chairpersons or vice chairpersons.
So our only option then is to censure or remove the chair if he or she is underperforming.
Our rules, we do not have the ability, well, as our rules are written today, we don't, I mean, Robert's rules calls for a censure, but our rules do not.
Interesting. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you. So given that, the November 1st deadline, the need to review, I think it would be, my thought process that on Tuesday, we talk about reviewing this document before November 1st of that year, so that whoever would be potentially thinking of running would truly know, and the board can truly set guidelines and expectations for the position. Similar to the vice chair, it seems like we're increasing responsibility for the vice chair, and then we're going to pay them more. And it seems to me, not knowing the history, only being on the board for 2 years, the responsibilities of the chair have become quite great, and hence that's why we've created this salary almost as a job, that the chair has become a county job. And the way I would look at that is as someone who is an elected official, one of 38, if the chairperson is one of 38, and the responsibility, when it starts extending beyond that to the point where there's so much administrative work, there's so many requirements to go to association members, legislative conferences, meetings, quarterly, now you're going to be part of CJCC, CCIT, all of that. It severely limits the potential for any one of those 38 becoming the chair. So I state that because I understand the importance of the chair, especially to the administrator, to the clerk, to the treasurer, to the people who work in this building and in the county. However, I do have some concerns about how this is growing. Similar, like I said, to about the vice chair, that we start growing and then we start accommodating. And I just wanted to make that statement, but I appreciate that we have this information now. Thank you.
I'll make one comment, and that one comment is, I think you see this, I see this, when you talk to other chairs of boards, whether throughout the state, the level of responsibility is indicative of what we have here. Maybe some of the committees, maybe not so much. The CJCC might be one of those that come to my mind, but the other chairs of other counties have very similar levels of responsibility. And they also have a coordinated, similar salary in some cases. Okay, any other discussion on the County Board Chairperson's guidelines and expectations? Supervisor Guild.
Just a clarification, you had mentioned the responsibility of approving mileage. I'm not seeing that on this document. Am I looking at an old version or something? I don't see that specifically on here.
For the rules?
No, for the County Board Chair
Okay.
item. Is that supposed to be there?
It's not on the document in the packet. You're looking at the right version. I think my understanding is the chair was indicating that that was something that probably should be added.
That's what I was wondering.
In candor, I didn't know this document existed until I read through the rules and saw a reference to it, and quite honestly, it took me a long time to find it. Looking through minutes of previous boards in 2018 to find it, and I think Chair Gibbs referenced the last time it was addressed by this committee that I could find was, I believe, 2018.
Correct.
So are we looking to, I mean, is this, what is the status of this document? Is it an official document? Is it a referenced point?
It's referenced in the rules.
Okay, so it is.
It is referenced in the
It
rules.
needs to have an official, so we have to take an official action in order to update it and,
That would be my suggestion.
okay.
That would be Rule 20 for expenses and reimbursements for travel.
Okay, so that part of it is already in Rule 20? So it doesn't necessarily have to be on this document, but for clarity, it probably should.
That would be my suggestion, but again, it's already spelled out in Rule 20. So if you wanted to have anybody that was looking to run for chair, they would have at a glance at least a rough idea of what their commitment is, they're committing to.
And are we looking for the executive committee today to make a recommendation to put forward some version of this document for final approval at the county board level next week? Is that appropriate?
I would defer to Corp Counsel and/or Administrator Leonard. It's referenced in the rule. I think it needs to have an official place.
If you want to make a motion for that revision, I think right now it's not in there. So a motion would be appropriate for recommendation that the board adopt that change.
Okay,
So I think the original intent was just to have the executive committee review the roles and responsibilities, but that was.
That's what I was wondering, is if
That
this
was,
something
that
that we
was
do.
my understanding of it when it was created.
Okay. So I guess I'd be curious to hear from my other executive committee members as to if you feel we need to, we have the, it would be appropriate for just this committee to make some updates on this document, or if we need to bring it forward for transparency.
The administrator says that he did say that it is to be reviewed by the board.
Okay.
If you look at rule, the rule relative, it's Rule 6, subsection M reads, fulfill other performance expectations to the board's satisfaction. See document entitled, quote, County Board Chairperson, Guidelines and Expectations, closed quote, which shall be maintained by the executive committee and reviewed from time to time by the board. So I read that, and certainly, I mean, they're your rules, but I read that to at least envision intent at the time that they were drafted to have that reviewed, as Supervisor Dickinson referenced, time intermittently up to the board.
Well, then with that perspective, I'm willing to make a motion to recommend that this document go forward for final approval for the Marathon County Board with the following changes. First, spelling out all acronyms that are included in this document, making the suggested change to add to 1AC, the CJCC meeting, criminal justice, I believe, and then monthly. I would also recommend the change, instead of removing annual recognition and retirement banquet, keeping it but changing the word banquet to event, and removing the reference to a specific date so that it has some flexibility. And then also adding clarification of the chair's responsibility for approving mileage as referenced in the rules. And expenses. Or expenses including mileage. I will defer to Corp Counsel for the appropriate legal terminology in there. You got that? Okay.
Is there a second?
You got all that? Just trying to bring it all together.
Supervisor Boots with a second. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, the motion is to amend to include the additional and amend the roles and responsibilities list of the county board chairperson. All those in favor of amending it signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries, and that also will move forward to the full board with the consideration of the rules. Any further discussion? Okay, we are down to the committee members are asked to bring future discussion items. Next executive committee meeting will be May 12th at 3 p.m. Per the board rules. And I would like to extend a sincere thank you to those members of the executive committee that have chosen not to run or were unsuccessful. And thank you for your commitment to the citizens of Marathon County and the success of this board, and for their dedicated service to the residents of Marathon County. So on that note, is there any other announcements?
Sure, this is Supervisor Pfeiffer.
Supervisor Pfeiffer, please.
Yeah, I just want to take an opportunity to thank yourself as well as the executive committee and the rest of the board. I've thoroughly enjoyed representing the county over the last 6 years and look forward to contributing in any way I can in the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Pfeiffer. Any other announcements? Okay, we are down to item number 8. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Guild to adjourn. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor
Pfeiffer
Leahy.
seconds.
Supervisor Pfeiffer with a second. Any discussion? All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, everyone.